I need you to tell everyone in that lobby that we are in love." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the crisp mountain air like a pane of shattered glass. She stood there in the freezing wind of the resort parking lot, her fingers gripping the lapels of her immaculate wool coat, trembling in a way I had never seen her tremble before. "My name is Elias. I am 32 years old, and I work as a corporate logistics manager for a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle. I am the guy who makes sure the freight elevators work, the event permits are filed, and the catering arrives on time. I am the invisible man in the gray sweater, the one who fixes the broken things while everyone else takes the credit." And the woman standing in front of me, asking me to lie to our entire company, was Clara. Clara was the senior account director, a woman known for her ruthless efficiency, her sharp suits, and her absolute refusal to tolerate incompetence. People called her an ice queen. People said she had a calculator where her heart should be. But looking at her now, with the snow beginning to fall and catch in her dark hair, I did not see an ice queen. I saw a woman who was absolutely terrified. I agreed to her insane request, of course. I took her hand, I walked into that crowded lobby, and I played the part of the devoted boyfriend so convincingly that it changed the trajectory of my entire existence. That is how I ended up marrying the woman everyone else at the office loved to hate. But to understand how we got to that lobby, and why a woman like Clara would ever turn to a ghost like me, I have to go back. Let me back up. Before the trip, before the lie, before Clara's hand in mine, I was a man who had entirely switched off. I lived in a state of profound, self-imposed isolation. It was a quiet kind of drowning. My father passed away 3 years before this story takes place, and when he died, he took the last of my warmth with him. He was a carpenter, a man of quiet strength and endless patience. He raised me on his own after my mother left, teaching me how to measure twice and cut once, how to listen to the grain of the wood, and how to fix things that the rest of the world had thrown away. He was my anchor. When his heart gave out on a rainy Tuesday in November, the anchor snapped, and I drifted out into a very cold, very dark ocean. I stopped engaging with the world. I went to work, I did my job perfectly, and I went home to an apartment that felt more like a waiting room than a home. I did not date. I did not go out with coworkers for drinks on Friday nights. I had convinced myself that I was simply not the kind of man who gets a family, not the kind of man who gets a happy ending. My last relationship had ended a year after my father died, with my ex-girlfriend packing her bags and telling me I was too quiet, too detached, too dead inside. She said being with me was like living in a house with all the windows boarded up. I believed her. I accepted the darkness. But my father had left me with a guiding principle, a piece of wisdom he used to repeat whenever I was frustrated by a difficult task or a difficult person. He would put his heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder and say, "You do not measure a person by how they stand in the sun, Elias. You measure them by who they shelter in the storm." I did not know it then, but Clara was standing in the center of a Category 5 hurricane. At work, Clara was a force of nature. She was brilliant, driven, and entirely uncompromising. She demanded perfection from her team, and she usually got it, though it earned her no friends. The narrative around the office was that Clara was a machine, a ruthless climber who would step on anyone to get to the executive floor. The chief architect of this narrative was a man named Julian. Julian was the vice president of sales. He was the golden boy, the charismatic charmer with the expensive watches, the perfect teeth, and the effortless ability to make everyone in the room feel like they were his best friend. Publicly, he was a star. Privately, he was a bully of the highest order. He was manipulative, entitled, and deeply threatened by Clara's competence. They had briefly dated years ago, a fact that was an open secret in the office, and when Clara ended it, Julian made it his mission to destroy her reputation. He took credit for her successful campaigns. He subtly undermined her in meetings with the board. He spread rumors that she was emotionally unstable, difficult to work with, and prone to hysterical outbursts. And Clara, bound by a secret she refused to share, never defended herself. She just took the hits, straightened her posture, and worked twice as hard. The company had organized a massive, week-long winter retreat at a luxury resort in the Cascade Mountains. It was ostensibly for team building, but everyone knew it was a proving ground. The CEO was retiring in 6 months, and the board was using this retreat to evaluate the top candidates for a major promotion. It was between Clara and Julian. Julian knew this, and he had spent the weeks leading up to the trip turning the entire executive team against her. He had framed her as a toxic presence, a lonely, bitter woman who could not maintain a healthy personal relationship, let alone lead a division. He had told the board that her personal life was a disaster, implying that she was unhinged. Clara was desperate. She needed this promotion not for the power and not for the prestige. She needed the money. This was the secret she carried, the burden that made her so unyielding at work. Clara was the sole provider for her younger sister, Lily. Lily had been diagnosed with a severe, degenerative neurological condition in her early 20s. The medical bills were astronomical. The specialized care facility, the constant physical therapy, the experimental treatments that insurance refused to cover, it all fell entirely on Clara's shoulders. She was drowning in debt. She was working 80-hour weeks to keep her sister alive and comfortable. She could not afford to lose this promotion to Julian, because losing the promotion meant pulling Lily out of the only facility that was slowing the progression of her disease. Julian had somehow found out about Lily. He did not know the details, but he knew Clara was financially vulnerable, and he used that leverage with sadistic pleasure. He had cornered Clara in the break room 2 days before the trip, mocking her, telling her that the board wanted a leader who was stable, someone with a solid family life, not a desperate spinster bleeding money on a lost cause. He told her he was bringing his beautiful new fiancée to the retreat, a subtle way of showcasing his perfect, curated life to the executives. He challenged Clara, asking if she even had anyone in her life willing to tolerate her for a weekend. In a moment of pure, panicked defiance, Clara lied. She told Julian she was in a serious, committed relationship. She told him her boyfriend was coming to the retreat. Julian laughed in her face and told her he could not wait to meet the poor bastard. That was why Clara found me in the loading dock on a Thursday afternoon, clipboard in hand, checking inventory for the retreat. She marched up to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a manic kind of exhaustion. She did not ask for my help. She demanded it. She told me she had bought me a ticket to the resort. She told me I was going to pose as her boyfriend of 8 months. She chose me because I was quiet. She chose me because I was competent, because I never gossiped, and because I was virtually invisible to the rest of the company. She figured I would simply stand in the background, nod when spoken to, and not complicate her life. I looked at her standing among the crates of branded company merchandise. I saw the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. I saw the dark circles under her eyes, heavily concealed by makeup but visible in the harsh fluorescent light of the loading dock. I did not ask why. I did not ask for details. I just remembered my father's voice, telling me to shelter those caught in the storm. I nodded. I said okay. The relief that washed over her face was so profound it physically hurt me to witness. The agreement created a strange, contained space between us. We had to build a history, a shared reality that could withstand the scrutiny of 50 coworkers and a hostile vice president. We drove up to the mountain resort together in her car, the snow falling heavy and thick against the windshield. The heater was broken on the passenger side, so I sat in the freezing cold, listening to the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers. Somewhere during that 3-hour drive, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing and started actually talking. We had to figure out how we met. I suggested a coffee shop, but she said that was too cliché. She suggested we met at a hardware store, arguing over the last can of a specific paint color. I smiled at that. It was the first time I had smiled in months. I told her I would have let her have the paint, because I preferred the quiet of giving in over the noise of an argument. She looked at me from the driver's seat, her expression softening. She said she would have demanded I take it because she hated accepting charity. We built our fake relationship brick by brick. We decided I called her by her middle name, Elise, when we were alone. We decided she hated the way I left my shoes by the front door, and I hated the way she drank her coffee black and entirely too hot. We invented inside jokes. We invented a timeline of dates, of arguments, of reconciliations. And as we built the lie, the silence in my chest began to recede. I found myself looking at the way her hands gripped the steering wheel, noticing the small, faded scar on her left thumb. I found myself wanting to know the real answers to the fake questions we were asking. When we arrived at the resort, the reality of what we were doing hit her. That was when she froze in the parking lot. That was when she looked at me, shivering in the wind, and begged me to make them believe we were in love. I did not just agree. I stepped forward, I wrapped my scarf around her neck, and I took her hand. Her fingers were like ice. I squeezed them gently, a silent promise that I was not going to let her fall. We walked into the lobby of the grand timber-framed lodge, the fire roaring in the massive stone hearth, the air buzzing with the chatter of the executive team. Julian was holding court by the reception desk, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his beautiful, vapid fiancée draped over his arm. When he saw Clara walk in, his smirk was instantaneous. When he saw my hand intertwined with hers, the smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, sauntering over to us with the slow, deliberate pace of a predator. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple wool coat, my scuffed boots, my utter lack of corporate polish. He extended a hand, introducing himself with a voice dripping in condescension. He told me he was shocked Clara had managed to convince someone to tolerate her schedule. He asked what I did for a living, his tone implying that whatever it was beneath him. I did not shrink. I shook his hand, my grip firm and steady. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I managed logistics, that I fixed the things other people broke. I kept my voice low, even, completely devoid of the intimidation he was trying to project. I told him Clara's schedule was a testament to her dedication, and that I considered myself exceptionally lucky to share whatever time she had. Julian's eyes narrowed. He was used to people backing down, used to people matching his aggression and losing. He did not know how to handle someone who simply refused to play his game. He offered a tight, fake smile and walked away, promising to catch up at the welcome dinner. Clara exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for a decade. She looked at me, genuine astonishment in her eyes. She whispered a quiet thank you. I just nodded, leading her toward the elevators. The first 2 days of the retreat were a masterclass in performance art. We sat next to each other at the seminars, my arm draped casually over the back of her chair. We ate dinner with the board members, laughing at the fake stories we had invented in the car. I learned how to read her micro-expressions. I learned that when she tapped her index finger against her wine glass, she was anxious. I learned that when she smiled with only the right side of her mouth, she was genuinely amused. And she learned about me. She noticed that I always situated myself between her and the busiest part of the room, acting as a physical buffer against the noise and the crowds. She noticed that I remembered how she liked her tea, bringing her a cup during the mid-morning breaks without her having to ask. The fake relationship was providing a shield, but underneath the shield, something incredibly real was taking root. I was no longer a ghost. I was waking up. I was feeling the blood rush through my veins, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of purpose. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to be the man she pretended I was. The turning point, the moment of absolute seeing, happened on the third night. There was a massive snowstorm outside, restricting everyone to the lodge. The company was hosting a casino night in the main ballroom. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and Julian was in his element, holding the attention of the CEO and the senior partners. I had lost track of Clara near the roulette tables. I went looking for her, wandering down the long, carpeted hallways of the guest wing. I found her in a small, dimly lit alcove near the ice machines. She was on her cell phone. She was crying. It was not a gentle, cinematic cry. It was a ragged, desperate weeping, the sound of a woman who had carried a mountain for far too long and was finally collapsing under the weight. I stopped at the edge of the hallway, hidden in the shadows, not wanting to intrude, but unable to walk away. I listened to her side of the conversation. She was talking to a doctor. She was begging. She was pleading with them not to change Lily's physical therapy schedule, promising that the next payment would clear by Friday, swearing that she would find the money, begging them not to let her sister regress. She said she could not lose her, that Lily was all she had left in the world. She hung up the phone and slid down the wall, pulling her knees to her chest, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, violent sobs. The illusion of the Ice Queen shattered completely. I saw the truth. I saw the profound, staggering self-sacrifice of a woman the world had labeled as selfish. She was taking all the hatred, all the resentment, all the cruel whispers of our coworkers, and she was using it as fuel to keep her sister alive. She was a hero walking among people who thought she was the villain. My chest tightened with an emotion so powerful it stole my breath. I did not announce myself. I did not offer empty platitudes. I just walked over, sat down on the floor next to her, and pulled a clean cotton handkerchief from my pocket. I handed it to her. She jumped, startled, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. She tried to instantly rebuild her armor, wiping her face frantically, apologizing, telling me it was just a stressful client call. I gently reached out and stopped her hands. I looked at her, entirely stripped of pretense. I told her she did not have to invent things with me anymore. I told her I heard. I told her about my father. I told her about the empty apartment, about the silence, about the way grief hollows you out until you are just an echo of a person. I shared my deepest, most shameful vulnerability with her, offering it as a bridge. I told her that I knew what it meant to carry something heavy in the dark. She looked at me, the tears welling up again, and for the first time since I met her, she let someone in. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat on the floor by the ice machine for an hour, the hum of the compressor the only sound in the alcove, her head resting against me, my arm wrapped securely around her shoulders. In that quiet, fluorescent-lit hallway, the pretend arrangement died, and something beautiful and terrifying was born in its place. The next evening was the climax of the retreat. It was the formal gala dinner, the final event before the board made their promotion decisions. The dining room was spectacular, filled with round tables draped in white linen, crystal centerpieces reflecting the candlelight, and a massive wall of windows looking out over the snow-covered peaks. Clara wore a dark green evening gown that made her look like royalty. I wore a borrowed tuxedo that fit reasonably well, though I felt entirely out of place among the bespoke suits of the executive team. Julian was seated at the table next to ours, positioned perfectly to hold the attention of the retiring CEO. Throughout the dinner, Julian had been taking subtle, targeted shots at Clara. He made jokes about her aggressive management style. He made passive-aggressive comments about her lack of team spirit. Clara absorbed it all, her spine perfectly straight, her face a mask of polite indifference, but I could feel the tension radiating from her under the table. I kept my hand on her knee, a steady, grounding pressure. As the dessert was being cleared, Julian stood up and tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. The room quieted down. He smiled, a wide, predatory grin, and announced he wanted to make a toast to the incredible talent at the company. He praised a few junior executives, he flattered the board, and then he turned his gaze to Clara. He raised his glass toward her. He spoke with a voice that was loud enough for the entire room to hear, dripping with false sympathy. He said he wanted to acknowledge Clara, who had overcome so much personal tragedy and emotional difficulty to be here. He said it was inspiring to see someone so fiercely independent finally find someone willing to put up with her demanding nature, even if it was just a logistics guy she dragged out of the basement. He chuckled, looking around the room to invite others to laugh with him. A few people nervously chuckled. Clara froze, the color draining from her face. Julian was trying to crack her. He was trying to provoke an outburst, trying to prove to the board that she was unstable and unfit for leadership. He wanted her to scream or to run out of the room crying. I felt Clara's hand tremble violently under the table. She was about to break. I did not let her. I stood up. I did not rush. I did not knock over my chair. I stood up with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who knows exactly how to fix a broken machine. The room went entirely silent. Julian looked at me, his smirk firmly in place, waiting for me to make a fool of myself. I picked up my own glass. I looked directly at Julian, bypassing his ego, bypassing his title, looking straight into the hollow, insecure core of him. I spoke in a voice that was not loud, but carried perfectly through the quiet room. I said that Julian was right about one thing. I said I was just a logistics guy. I said my job was to see how things actually work, behind the scenes, away from the spotlight. I turned my gaze to the CEO and the board members. I told them that in my line of work, you learn to spot structural integrity. You learn the difference between a facade that crumbles under pressure and a foundation that can hold up the world. I looked back at Julian. I told him that I had spent the last 8 months watching Clara carry burdens that would crush a lesser person. I did not reveal her secret about Lily. I did not betray her trust. Instead, I spoke to her character. I said she was the most resilient, honorable, and fiercely protective person I had ever known. I said she fought for her team, she fought for this company, and she did it without ever asking for applause. I raised my glass higher. I quoted my father, the words echoing in the silent, crystal-lit room. I said you do not measure a person by how they stand in the sun, where it is easy to smile and take the credit. You measure them by who they shelter in the storm. I looked down at Clara, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her expression one of utter awe. I said Clara builds shelters. I looked back at Julian, my voice dropping to a register of absolute, unyielding steel. I said Julian just builds facades. I drank from my glass, set it down on the table, and offered my hand to Clara. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian's face was an ugly, mottled red. He opened his mouth to speak, to counter, to insult me. But the retiring CEO simply cleared his throat and looked away from Julian. A clear, devastating dismissal. The spell was broken. Julian's narrative was cracked, irreparably damaged by a quiet truth he could not shout down. Clara took my hand. She stood up, radiant and entirely unbroken. We walked out of the dining room together, our footsteps steady and synchronized on the hardwood floor. We did not stop walking until we reached the outdoor terrace, the freezing night air hitting us like a shockwave. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was incredibly clear, a vast ocean of stars stretching out over the jagged peaks of the mountains. Clara let go of my hand, only to wrap her arms around my neck, pulling me into a fierce, desperate embrace. She buried her face in my coat. She was crying again, but this time, there was no despair in the sound. It was the sound of a massive, crushing weight being lifted. She stepped back, looking up at me, the moonlight catching the tears on her cheeks. She asked me why I did that. She asked why I risked my own job, my own anonymity, to defend a lie. I reached out and gently brushed a tear away with my thumb. I told her it was not a lie anymore. I told her I did not want to go back to the basement. I told her I did not want to go back to my empty apartment, to my silence, to my life as a ghost. I told her I wanted to be the man who held her hand in the lobby, the man who brought her tea, the man who sat with her by the ice machine. I asked her if she would let me stay. She looked at me, a brilliant, genuine smile breaking across her face, the first real smile I had seen from her in the daylight. She pulled me down by the lapels of my jacket and kissed me. It was a kiss that tasted like cold mountain air, like champagne, and like absolute, undeniable salvation. The aftermath of the retreat was swift and decisive. Clara got the promotion. The board, prompted by the cracks in Julian's facade, did a quiet audit of his division and found a trail of toxic management practices, manipulated expense reports, and alienated clients. Julian was asked to resign quietly 3 weeks later. He packed his office on a Tuesday, carrying a cardboard box out to his expensive car, entirely stripped of his power. Clara did not gloat. She simply moved into her new office, secured her new salary, and immediately wired the funds to Lily's care facility, ensuring her sister's treatment would continue uninterrupted for the next 5 years. As for us, the transition from pretend to reality was the easiest thing I have ever done. At 1 month, I was spending every evening at her apartment, fixing the leaky faucet she had ignored for a year, cooking dinner while she finished her conference calls. At 6 months, we moved into a small house with a garden, a place with enough sunlight to banish the shadows I had lived in for so long. We visited Lily every Sunday. I read books to her. I fixed her wheelchair when the brakes got sticky, and I watched Clara transform from a stressed, terrified provider into a joyful, loving sister. At 2 years, I took Clara back to the mountain resort. We stood on the same outdoor terrace under a canopy of stars. I got down on one knee. I did not buy a diamond. I offered her my father's gold ring, the one he wore every day of his life in the workshop, the one that smelled faintly of sawdust and history. I asked her to marry me. She said yes before I even finished the question. When I look back on that week in the mountains, I realized the profound irony of the entire situation. Clara came to me in the loading dock because she needed to be saved. She thought I was the quiet, invisible man who could provide a temporary shield against the cruelty of her world. I thought I was performing an act of charity. I thought I was honoring my father's memory by stepping into the storm to hold the umbrella for a woman who was drowning. But that is the beautiful, terrifying trick of love. It blinds you to the reality of who is actually being rescued. I did not save Clara. Clara was already saving herself. She was already the strongest person in any room she walked into. She did not need a hero. She just needed someone to stand beside her so she did not have to fight the entire war alone. In the process of asking me to pretend, she forced me to wake up. She dragged me out of my isolation, out of my grief, out of the dark, silent museum I had built around my heart. She gave me a purpose. She gave me a family. She was the storm, yes, but she was also the rain that finally made the desert bloom. My father was right. You do not measure a person by how they stand in the sun. You measure them by who they shelter in the storm. And Clara, with all her sharp edges, her fierce ambition, and her desperate, beautiful love for her sister, sheltered me from a life of absolute nothingness. She asked me to pose as her boyfriend for one company trip. Neither of us wanted it to end. And because we chose to be brave in the dark, it never did.